My name is Van. I am 67 years old. I am standing in an empty house right now, looking out the window at a street I have known for 35 years. Yesterday, I signed the papers to sell this house. Not because I needed the money, not because I wanted to leave, but because my daughter Patricia, the little girl I sacrificed everything for, tried to push me into a nursing home so she could take this house for herself. She did not know I heard every word of her plan, and she did not know I had a plan of my own. I do not hate her, but I could not let her think that my kindness was weakness. Before I tell you what happened, let me know where you are watching from today. And if you believe that parents deserve respect, hit that like button right now. This story might make you think twice about what you thought you knew about family. I bought this piece of land back in 1989. Patricia was just 5 years old, then a little girl with pigtails who loved to chase butterflies in the backyard of our tiny apartment. My wife Linda and I had been saving every penny we could, dreaming of a real home where our daughter could grow up with a yard to play in and a room of her own. I was working as an industrial electrician back then. The pay was decent, but not great. So I took extra shifts at night and picked up side jobs on weekends. Linda worked the night shift at the hospital as a nurse, so we could save money on childcare. We barely saw each other some weeks, just passing like ships in the night, leaving notes on the kitchen counter about what Patricia had eaten or whether she had finished her homework. Building this house nearly broke us. I remember pouring the foundation myself on a hot July weekend, my back aching so bad I could barely stand up straight by Sunday evening. Linda painted every single wall in this house with her own hands. I taught myself how to wire the electrical system properly because we could not afford to hire someone. It took us 4 years to finish everything, 4 years of exhaustion and sacrifice, and wondering if we were crazy to take on something this big. But we did it. We built this house with our own hands, our own sweat, our own love. Patricia took her first steps in the living room, right over there by the fireplace. She learned to ride a bike in the driveway. She had her first heartbreak crying on the porch swing that I built for Linda on our 10th anniversary. Every corner of this house holds a memory, a piece of our family history. I never complained about the sacrifices. That is what fathers do. I remember when Patricia was 16 and desperately wanted to go on a school trip to Washington, D.C. We did not have the money, not really. But I sold my old pickup truck, the one I had restored with my own hands over 3 summers, and I told her that I was tired of fixing it anyway. She never knew the truth. She never knew that I walked to work for 6 months until I could afford another car. When she got accepted to Ohio State, Linda and I cried tears of joy. Then we looked at the tuition costs and I felt my stomach drop. We took out a second mortgage on the house, something I swore I would never do. I picked up even more overtime shifts until my supervisor told me I was going to work myself into an early grave. But Patricia graduated with honors, no student debt, weighing her down free to start her life without that burden. There were so many moments like that over the years. The time Linda and I canceled our 25th anniversary trip to Hawaii because Patricia needed help with the down payment on her first apartment. The time I worked through pneumonia because I could not afford to miss the overtime that was paying for her wedding. The time we dipped into our retirement savings to help her and Derek buy their first house because the market was tough and they needed a bigger down payment. I never kept score. I never expected anything in return. I just loved my daughter and wanted to give her every opportunity I never had. Then Linda got sick. Cancer. The word still feels like a punch to the gut even after 5 years. She fought hard for 18 months, harder than anyone I have ever known. I took early retirement to care for her full time. Patricia came to visit when she could, but she was busy with her career in real estate, busy with her own kids, busy with her life. I understood. At least I told myself I understood. Linda passed on a Tuesday morning in spring with the sun coming through the bedroom window and the birds singing outside like the world did not know it was ending. I held her hand until it went cold. She made me promise to take care of Patricia, to always be there for our daughter no matter what. I promised. I meant it with every fiber of my being. After the funeral, something started to change with Patricia. At first it was subtle. The phone calls that used to come every few days became once a week, then once every 2 weeks. The Sunday dinners she used to host at her house where I would play with my grandchildren and feel like I still had a family. Those became monthly, then every other month, then only on holidays. I made excuses for her. She is busy with work. The kids have so many activities. Derek got a promotion and they are adjusting. I filled my days with projects around the house, with visits to the cemetery, to talk to Linda, with long walks through the neighborhood where I had spent more than half my life. The grandchildren, Emma and Jake, they became the light of my world. Emma is 12 now, smart as a whip and curious about everything. Jake is 9, all energy and mischief and gap-toothed smiles. Every summer, I would have them stay with me for 2 weeks. I taught Emma how to fish at the lake where I used to take Patricia when she was small. I showed Jake how to build birdhouses in my workshop, watching his face light up when he hammered in a nail all by himself. Linda had this recipe for chocolate chip cookies that the kids absolutely loved. Every time they visited, we would make a batch together and the whole house would smell like heaven. Jake would always eat so much raw cookie dough that I worried he would make himself sick. Emma would carefully measure each ingredient, so serious and precise, reminding me so much of her grandmother. Those 2 weeks each summer kept me going through the lonely months. But lately, Patricia has been finding reasons why the kids cannot come. Summer camp conflicts, family vacation plans, a special program at school. Always something, always an excuse delivered with that tone in her voice that tells me not to push it. I let it go. I have always let things go when it comes to Patricia. Maybe that was my first mistake. About 3 months ago, I got a phone call from Patricia that struck me as strange. She called on a Wednesday afternoon, which was unusual because she normally only called on weekends if she called at all. Her voice was different, too sweeter than normal, almost like she was trying too hard to sound caring. She asked about my health in a way she never had before. Not just the usual quick questions about whether I was feeling okay. She wanted specifics. Was I sleeping well? Had I been forgetting things lately? Did I ever leave the stove on by accident? Had I fallen recently? I answered honestly. I sleep fine, maybe get up once a night to use the bathroom like any man my age. My memory is sharp as ever. I have never forgotten to turn off the stove in my life. And no, I had not fallen. She seemed almost disappointed by my answers, which confused me at the time. She kept pushing, asking if I was sure, saying that it is okay to admit if I was having trouble because she just wanted to help. I told her I appreciated her concern, but I was doing just fine. After we hung up, I felt oddly unsettled, but I pushed the feeling aside and told myself I should be grateful that my daughter was showing interest in my well-being. A week later, Derek came to visit. Alone. In all the years Patricia had been married to him, Derek had never once come to my house without her. He said he was in the area for a work thing and thought he would stop by to check on me. He wandered around the house like he was inspecting it. He looked up at the ceiling and mentioned that the roof was probably getting old. He checked the thermostat and asked how the heating system was holding up. He went out to the backyard and commented on how much work the lawn must be for someone my age to maintain. Then he started asking about paperwork. Did I have all my documents organized? Where did I keep the deed to the house? Had I ever thought about adding Patricia to the title, just to make things easier down the road? I felt my jaw tighten, but I kept my voice calm. I told him my documents were organized just fine, and that I was not planning any changes to the deed. He backed off quickly, laughed it off like he was just making conversation. But I saw something in his eyes that I did not like. Something calculating. After he left, I sat in my chair for a long time thinking. Linda used to say I had good instincts about people. She would tell me that I could always sense when something was off even before I could put it into words. Sitting there in my living room, watching the sun go down through the window Linda used to love. I felt that sense of wrongness settling into my bones. 2 weeks later, Patricia invited me to dinner at her house. It was just the four of us, no kids, which she said was because Emma had a sleepover and Jake was at a friend's house. The meal was nice enough roast chicken and mashed potatoes, foods I have always liked. But the conversation took a turn that made my appetite disappear. Patricia started talking about how big my house was. 4 bedrooms for one person, she said, shaking her head like it was the most impractical thing she had ever heard. All those stairs, all that maintenance. Did I not get lonely rattling around in there by myself? Then she brought up accidents. She had read an article, she said, about how many seniors get injured in falls at home and never fully recover. She mentioned a neighbor of a friend who had a stroke and lay on the floor for 2 days before anyone found him. She talked about carbon monoxide leaks and electrical fires and all the dangers of living alone. Finally, she got to her point. Had I ever considered moving somewhere with more support? She did not say nursing home. She said continuing care community and assisted living facility. She made it sound nice, like a resort for old people where I would make friends and have activities and never have to worry about anything. I looked across the table at my daughter, at this woman I had raised from a baby, and I barely recognized her. The way she spoke about me like I was already helpless, already a burden, already on my way out. I told her politely but firmly that I was not interested, that I was perfectly capable of taking care of myself, that I intended to live in my house until the day I died. She exchanged a look with Derek that sent a chill down my spine. It was quick, just a flicker, but I caught it. A look that said they had expected this, that they had a plan for my resistance. I drove home that night with my hands tight on the steering wheel, my mind racing. Something was very wrong. I did not want to believe what I was starting to suspect, but the evidence was piling up in a way I could no longer ignore. A few days later, my neighbor Margaret called. Margaret and her husband Bill have lived next door to me for 40 years. We watched each other's kids grow up. We have shared holiday dinners and borrowed tools and helped each other through hard times. Margaret is not one for gossip or drama, so when she called and said she needed to tell me something, I listened. Patricia had come to see her. Not to say hello, not to reminisce about old times. She had come to ask questions about me. Was I acting strange lately? Did I seem confused? Had I forgotten her name or gotten lost in the neighborhood? Margaret told me she was honest with Patricia. She said I was the same as I had always been, sharp as a tack and stubborn as a mule. But Margaret was worried about why Patricia was asking. She thought I deserved to know. I thanked her and hung up the phone. Then I sat in my kitchen in the dark for a long time. The pieces were coming together now, forming a picture I desperately did not want to see. My daughter was building a case. She was collecting evidence or trying to create it. She was laying the groundwork for something. That night I could not sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the same ceiling I had installed myself 33 years ago, listening to the familiar creaks and groans of my house settling in the darkness. I thought about Patricia as a little girl, how she used to run to me when she was scared, how she would climb into my lap and say that Daddy could fix anything. What happened to that little girl? Where did she go? The letter arrived on a Monday. It came in an official-looking envelope from a law firm I had never heard of, someplace with 3 names and the word associates at the end. My hands trembled slightly as I opened it, not from weakness but from a growing sense of dread. The letter requested my presence at their office to discuss establishing power of attorney and guardianship arrangements. It mentioned Patricia by name, saying that my daughter had contacted them out of concern for my well-being. It referenced my declining health and diminished capacity, phrases that hit me like slaps across the face. I had not seen any doctor who would say such things. I had not given anyone any reason to question my mental state. But there it was in black and white, a legal letter, treating me like I was already incompetent, already unable to make my own decisions. I did not respond to the letter. Instead, I put it in a folder and started keeping records. Every phone call, every visit, every strange question. I wrote down dates and times and what was said. I did not know exactly what I was preparing for, but some instinct told me I needed documentation. 2 weeks later, I went to Patricia's house to return a sweater that Emma had left at my place during her last visit months ago now. I still kept hoping I might see the kids, might get a few minutes to hug them and hear about their lives. I drove over on a Thursday afternoon expecting no one to be home. I used the spare key Patricia had given me years ago, back when we were still close enough that an open door policy made sense. I figured I would just leave the sweater on the kitchen counter with a note and be on my way. But as I stepped into the foyer, I heard voices coming from the kitchen. Patricia and Derek talking in that intense way people talk when they think no one can hear them. I should have announced myself. I should have called out that I was there. But something made me stop. Something made me stand very still in that hallway and listen. Patricia was on the phone, but it was on speaker, and Derek was there too, responding to whatever was being said. I could not make out the other person's voice, but I could hear my daughter clearly. Every word. Every poisonous word. She talked about me like I was an obstacle to be removed. She said I was starting to show signs of dementia, that I had forgotten to turn off the stove twice last month, that I had gotten lost driving home from the grocery store. Lies. All lies. None of that had ever happened. She talked about the doctor. She had contacted my doctor's office, pretended to be a concerned family member, and managed to get someone to note concerns about cognitive decline in my file based on her reports alone. I had not even been examined. She was manufacturing evidence. Then she talked about the house. Our house. The house I built with my own 2 hands. She talked about its value, how the market was hot right now, how they could probably get $450,000 for it, maybe more if they staged it right. She talked about how that money would solve all their problems, how they could pay off Derek's failed investment and buy a bigger place in a nicer neighborhood. Derek asked about timing. Patricia said they needed to move fast, get me declared incompetent before I caught on, get the guardianship in place, then move me to the cheapest facility they could find. She laughed and said that at my age it probably would not be for long anyway. She laughed. My daughter laughed about putting me away to die so she could take my house. The worst part, the part that will stay with me until my last breath, was what she said next. She said that he does not even remember where he puts his keys, half the time that he is practically a vegetable already. More lies. My keys are always on the hook by the door where they have been for 3 decades. Then she said this is the best thing for everyone. He does not need a 4-bedroom house. He does not need all that space. And we need the money. I stood in that hallway with my heart pounding so hard, I thought it might give out right there. Part of me wanted to storm into that kitchen and confront her. Part of me wanted to scream and demand to know how she could do this to me after everything I had done for her. But I did not do either of those things. I backed away silently, carefully, like I was walking through a minefield. I let myself out the front door without making a sound. I got in my car and drove home in a fog, barely seeing the road through the tears that kept blurring my vision. When I got home, I sat in my dark living room for hours. I did not turn on any lights. I did not eat. I just sat there in the chair that used to be Linda's, the one I kept, because it still smelled like her perfume if I buried my face in the cushion and I let the pain wash over me. I thought about every sacrifice, every late night, every missed opportunity, every dollar I spent on Patricia instead of saving for my own retirement. I thought about the promises I made to Linda, the promise that I would always take care of our daughter. Had I failed? Had I raised a monster? Was this somehow my fault? I cried that night. Really cried deep sobs that shook my whole body, the kind of crying I had not done since Linda's funeral. I cried for the daughter I thought I had. I cried for the future I thought we would share. I cried for all the years I had spent believing that family meant something, that love was enough, that my sacrifices would be honored. By the time the sun came up, I had made a decision. I was done crying. I was done being a victim. I was done letting my daughter treat me like a problem to be solved. I did not want revenge. That is not who I am. But I was not going to lay down and let her walk all over me either. I was going to take control of my own life, my own future, my own dignity. And I was going to do it without raising my voice, without creating a scene, without giving her the satisfaction of seeing me broken. I loved my daughter. Part of me still does, even now. But love does not mean being a doormat. Love does not mean letting someone destroy you. Linda taught me that. She was the strongest person I ever knew, and she would never have let anyone treat her the way Patricia was trying to treat me. That morning, sitting in Linda's chair with the sunrise painting the walls golden, I started making plans. The first thing I did was call Harold. Harold and I go back 40 years to when we both worked for the same electrical company. He went on to law school later in life, became a small-town attorney who specialized in wills and estates. We stayed in touch over the years, playing golf when our knees allowed it, sharing a beer at the local bar when life got heavy. I told Harold everything. He listened without interrupting, which is one of the things I have always appreciated about him. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he said something that lifted a weight off my shoulders. He told me that legally I was in a strong position. The house was entirely in my name. Always had been. Linda and I had kept it that way for tax reasons back when we were still paying off the mortgage. Patricia had no legal claim to the property whatsoever. If I wanted to sell it tomorrow, there was nothing she could do to stop me. He also told me that what Patricia was attempting could be considered elder abuse. Trying to get someone declared incompetent under false pretenses, manufacturing evidence of mental decline, attempting to gain control of their assets through deception. These were serious matters. He said I could press charges if I wanted to, could make her life very difficult legally. I thought about it. I really did. But in the end, I decided against it. Taking my daughter to court, dragging our family through that kind of public spectacle, it would not bring me peace. It would just create more pain, more anger, more wounds that might never heal. That was not the ending I wanted. Instead, I asked Harold to help me do something else. I asked him to help me sell my house quietly and legally in a way that Patricia would not find out about until it was done. The next step was getting a proper medical evaluation. I did not trust whatever Patricia had managed to plant in my file at my regular doctor's office. I needed independent proof that I was mentally competent, something official that no one could dispute. I drove 2 hours to Columbus and checked into a hospital that had no connection to anyone in my family. I told them I wanted a complete physical and cognitive evaluation that I was considering some major life changes and wanted documentation of my mental state. They were happy to accommodate. The tests took most of a day. Physical exam, blood work, cognitive assessments, memory tests, problem-solving exercises. I talked to a neurologist and a psychiatrist. I answered hundreds of questions that ranged from obvious to puzzling. A week later, the results came back. I was in excellent health for a man my age. Blood pressure slightly elevated, but controlled with medication. Mild arthritis in my hands and knees. Nothing unusual, nothing concerning. Most importantly, my cognitive function was completely normal. No signs of dementia, no memory issues, no decreased capacity of any kind. The doctor wrote up a detailed report and signed it himself. He told me I was sharper than most of his patients half my age. I thanked him, took the paperwork, and drove home feeling like I had armor now, something solid to protect myself with. Then I called a real estate agent. Not someone local who might know Patricia, but an agent from a town 30 miles away who came highly recommended by one of Harold's colleagues. Her name was Susan, a no-nonsense woman in her 50s, who understood immediately when I explained that I needed discretion. Susan came to see the house on a Tuesday morning. She walked through every room, took notes, checked the bones of the place. She told me what I already knew, that it was a solid house, well-maintained, in a desirable neighborhood. She estimated I could get somewhere between $420,000 and $450,000 for it, depending on the buyer. I told her I wanted to sell quickly and quietly. No public listings, no open houses, no signs in the yard. She said she had buyers looking for exactly this kind of property, families who wanted to avoid bidding wars and were willing to pay a fair price for a private sale. Within 2 weeks, she brought me an offer. A young couple with a newborn baby looking for a safe neighborhood with good schools. They offered $420,000 cash with a 30-day close. I met them once briefly, and I liked them. They reminded me of Linda and me back when we were starting out, full of hope and plans and love. I accepted the offer. While the sale was being processed, I reached out to my brother George. George is 5 years younger than me. Retired from the Postal Service, living in a little beach town in North Carolina, where the pace of life is slow and the sunsets are spectacular. He and his wife Marlene had been asking me to come visit for years. When I called and told him I was thinking of moving down there, he nearly dropped the phone from excitement. He said he knew a place, a little 2-bedroom cottage about a mile from the beach. Recently renovated, the owner was an old friend who was willing to sell at a fair price. $180,000, George said. Nice neighborhood. Quiet. The kind of place where a man could find peace. I put in an offer that same day. The owner accepted within hours. Everything was falling into place. The sale of my house was proceeding smoothly. My new home was waiting for me. The medical report proved I was competent. The legal paperwork was airtight. Patricia had no idea any of this was happening. Throughout those weeks, I kept up the facade. When Patricia called, I answered. I kept my voice normal, my words careful. I did not give her any hint that I knew what she was planning. I played the part of the clueless old man she thought I was the easy target she had underestimated. It was not easy. Every time I heard her voice, I felt the pain fresh again, like a wound that would not heal. But I kept my composure. I had learned a long time ago that sometimes the strongest thing you can do is stay quiet and wait. The day I signed the final papers to sell my house was bittersweet in a way I cannot fully describe. Harold had everything set up at his office, all the documents spread out on his big oak desk, the same desk where he had helped me write my will 10 years earlier. My hand shook slightly as I signed my name, but not from age or weakness. It shook because I was signing away 35 years of memories, 35 years of life, 35 years of love and struggle and everything that mattered to me. When the last signature was done, Harold shook my hand and told me the money would be in my new account by end of business. $420,000. More than enough to buy my new place live comfortably for however many years I had left, and still leave something behind for people who deserved it. I drove back to the house alone. My house for just a few more days. I walked through every room, slowly touching the walls, remembering. Here was where Patricia took her first steps. Here was where Linda and I danced in the kitchen on our anniversary, no music except what we hummed together. Here was where I sat up all night when Patricia had the flu. Here was where we celebrated every Christmas for 3 decades. The packing had already begun. I had been doing it slowly over the past few weeks, sorting through a lifetime of possessions. Most of the furniture I was leaving for the new family. They were young, just starting out, could use a break. I kept only what mattered most: the photo albums, Linda's jewelry box, my tools, the rocking chair that Linda used to nurse Patricia in when she was a baby. I found myself holding things and crying more than once. A ticket stub from a concert Linda and I went to on our 5th anniversary. A macaroni art project Patricia made in 1st grade still hanging on the basement wall. A thank you card from some holiday I could not even remember, with Patricia's childish handwriting saying, "Best daddy ever." Where did that little girl go? How did she become someone who could throw her father away like garbage? I packed the boxes, carefully sealing each one like I was closing a chapter. The moving truck came on a Friday. 2 men who worked quickly and efficiently, loading my life into the back of their vehicle in a matter of hours. The hardest part was writing the letter. I sat at the kitchen table, the same table where we had shared thousands of meals as a family, and I tried to find the words. I must have started over a dozen times, crumpling page after page. I did not want to be cruel. Despite everything, I did not want to hurt my daughter more than necessary. But I needed her to understand. I needed her to know that I knew that I was not the fool she thought I was, that my kindness had never been weakness. In the end, the letter was 3 pages long. I told her about every sacrifice I had made, not to guilt her, but to remind her of the father I had been. I told her that I knew about her plan, that I had heard her conversation with Derek, that I had seen the legal letters and understood what she was trying to do. I told her I was not angry. That was the truth. The anger had burned itself out over the past weeks, leaving behind something sadder and quieter. I told her I was disappointed, that I was hurt beyond words, but that I did not hate her. I told her about the house. I told her I had sold it, that the money was mine to do with, as I pleased, that she had never owned any part of it, no matter what she believed. I told her that parents are not stepping stones, not ATMs, not obstacles to be cleared away when they become inconvenient. At the end of the letter, I wrote something that I hoped might plant a seed somewhere in her heart. I wrote that I still loved her, that part of me would always love her, but that I also loved myself. I wrote that I hoped someday she would understand that those 2 loves are not in conflict, that a person can hold space for both the love of family and the love of self. I signed it simply, Dad. I left the letter on the kitchen counter, propped against the salt and pepper shakers that had belonged to Linda's mother, shakers I was leaving behind because the new family had admired them. The morning I left, I woke before dawn. I walked through the empty house one last time, my footsteps echoing on the hardwood floors. I stood in each room for a moment, saying goodbye in my heart. The nursery that had become Patricia's bedroom, that had become a guest room. The master bedroom where Linda and I had spent 10,000 nights. the kitchen where the smell of her cooking had once filled the air. I locked the front door and put the key in my pocket. Then I got in my car, backed out of the driveway, and started driving south. The sun rose somewhere around the West Virginia border, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. I rolled down the window and let the cool morning air wash over me. In my rearview mirror, I could see the road stretching back toward everything I was leaving behind. Ahead of me was nothing but highway and possibility. I did not feel triumphant. I did not feel victorious. I just felt quiet inside, like the storm had passed, and the world was still again. I did not know what Patricia would do when she found my letter. I did not know if she would be angry or sorry or both. I did not know if we would ever speak again. All I knew was that I had done what I needed to do. I had protected myself. I had preserved my dignity. I had refused to be a victim. And sometimes, at 67 years old, that is all a man can do. Patricia found out 2 days after I left. I know this because she called me 17 times that day, leaving message after message that I did not answer. The first few messages were pure rage. How could you do this? This is my house, you had no right. She screamed into the phone like I had stolen something from her, like I was the villain in this story. Then the messages changed. Her voice got quieter, more desperate. She started crying. She said she was sorry, said she had only been trying to help, said she never meant for things to go this far. She begged me to call her back, to explain, to give her a chance to make it right. I listened to all of them, every single one. I sat on the porch of George's house with the ocean breeze in my face, and I listened to my daughter fall apart over and over again. It was not satisfying. I thought maybe it would be some dark part of me hoped to feel vindicated, but all I felt was tired and sad. This was my child. This was the baby I had rocked to sleep, the toddler I had carried on my shoulders, the teenager I had taught to drive. Hearing her pain, even knowing what she had tried to do, still hurt. George came out and sat with me after the last message played. He did not say anything for a long time. Then he put his hand on my shoulder and told me I did the right thing. He told me that sometimes love means letting go, means protecting yourself even when it hurts. I nodded, but I could not speak. My voice was trapped somewhere behind all the feelings I did not know how to express. A few weeks later, I learned more about why Patricia had been so desperate for money. George heard it through a friend of a friend, the way news travels in small communities, even when people try to keep secrets. Derek had made a bad investment. Real estate, ironically. He had put a significant amount of money into a development deal that went sour, and they were facing serious financial trouble. That did not excuse what Patricia tried to do. Nothing could excuse it. But it helped me understand in a way. Fear makes people do terrible things. Desperation clouds judgment. My daughter had looked at her problems and seen me as a solution, an asset to be liquidated, rather than a person to be loved. It made me sad more than angry. She had become someone who saw her own father as a means to an end. The hardest communication came about a month after I moved. Not from Patricia, but from Emma. My granddaughter found me through social media, something I barely know how to use, but George had helped me set up. Her message was simple and heartbreaking. "Grandpa, where did you go? I miss you. Mom and Dad are fighting all the time, and no one will tell me what happened. Did I do something wrong?" I read that message probably 100 times. Then I wrote back carefully, trying to find words that a 12-year-old could understand, without burdening her with adult problems. I told her that I loved her more than words could say. I told her that grandparents and parents sometimes have disagreements just like kids do, and that I needed some time away to think about things. I told her that none of this was her fault, not one bit, that she was perfect and wonderful, and I was proud of her every single day. I told her that when she was older, when she was grown up with a life of her own, I would explain everything. I told her that until then she should know that her grandpa was okay, that I was living near the beach and thinking of her all the time. I did not know if it was enough. How do you explain to a child that her mother tried to throw away her grandfather? How do you protect innocence from the ugly truths of the adult world? Jake did not reach out. He was too young for social media, too young to understand what was happening. But I thought about him every day, about his gap-toothed smile and his endless energy and the way he used to climb into my lap and ask me to tell him stories about when his mom was little. Would I ever see them again? I did not know. The uncertainty ate at me in quiet moments when the house was still and the memories came flooding back. But I could not undo what was done. I could not pretend that Patricia had not betrayed me. I could not go back to being the naive father who believed his daughter loved him more than his money. All I could do was move forward. All I could do was hope that someday, somehow, the broken pieces of my family might find a way to fit back together. The first few months in North Carolina were not easy. I want to be honest about that. Some mornings I woke up not remembering where I was reaching for Linda beside me, then remembering twice over that she was gone and that I had left everything else behind too. The grief came in waves, not just for Linda, but for the life I thought I would have in my retirement. I had imagined growing old in that house, spoiling my grandchildren, maybe even seeing great-grandchildren someday. I had imagined Patricia and Derek coming over for Sunday dinners, the house full of noise and laughter and life. Instead, I was starting over at 67 in a new town, where I knew almost no one, trying to build a life from the wreckage of the old one. But slowly, day by day, things got better. George was a godsend. He took me fishing every morning that first month, teaching me where the best spots were, which lures worked for which fish. His wife Marlene made sure I never went hungry, always dropping off casseroles and pies with instructions to bring back the dishes when I was done. I joined a veterans group that met at the community center on Thursday nights. I had served 2 years in the Army back before Patricia was born, nothing dramatic, mostly stateside duty during peacetime. But it gave me something in common with the other men there, a shared language of service and sacrifice. One of them, a fellow named Ray, who had done 3 tours in Vietnam, became a good friend. We would sit on my porch in the evenings watching the sunset, talking about everything and nothing. He had his own family troubles, kids who barely called grandchildren he saw once a year if he was lucky. We understood each other in a way that did not need many words. I started seeing a counselor too. That was hard to admit at first. Men of my generation did not talk about therapy, did not acknowledge that we might need help sorting through our feelings. But George insisted, said it had helped him after Marlene's cancer scare. A few years back, said there was no shame in taking care of your mind, the same way you would take care of your body. Her name was Dr. Patterson, a kind woman with gray hair and patient eyes. I sat in her office once a week and talked about things I had never said out loud, about feeling like a failure as a father, about wondering if I had somehow caused Patricia to become the person she was, about the guilt that gnawed at me even though I knew rationally that I had done nothing wrong. She helped me understand that I could not control other people's choices, that Patricia was an adult who had made adult decisions, and that those decisions reflected on her, not on me. That loving someone did not mean accepting abuse from them. That setting boundaries was not the same as abandoning family. It took time, but eventually the storm clouds in my mind began to clear. I found a rhythm to my new life. Mornings fishing or walking on the beach. Afternoons reading or puttering in the small workshop I set up in my garage. Evenings with George and Marlene or Ray or the other friends I was slowly making. I thought about Patricia every day. There was no avoiding that, but the thoughts became less painful, over time less sharp-edged. I could hold them without bleeding now. About a year after I moved, a letter arrived. Not an email, not a text, but an actual handwritten letter in an envelope with Patricia's return address. My hands shook as I opened it, and I had to sit down before I could read it. It was 4 pages long, written in Patricia's familiar handwriting that I had watched develop from clumsy childhood letters to the neat script of adulthood. She wrote about everything, about how wrong she had been, about how the stress of their financial problems had made her desperate and stupid, about how losing me had forced her to take a hard look at herself and realize she did not like what she saw. She admitted the whole plan. She wrote it out in detail, holding nothing back. The fake concerns about my health, the attempt to get me declared incompetent, the calculations about what my house was worth and how they would spend the money. Reading it in her own words was painful, but it was also a strange relief. No more secrets, no more pretending. She wrote that she had started seeing a therapist herself, that she was working on understanding why she had become someone capable of doing what she tried to do, that she was not asking for forgiveness because she knew she did not deserve it. At the end of the letter, she wrote just one request. She asked if maybe someday, when enough time had passed, I might consider letting her try to earn back my trust. Not forgiveness, she emphasized. She knew that might never come. Just the chance to try. I read that letter probably 100 times over the following weeks. I did not respond right away. I was not ready. The wound was healing, but it was not healed, and I did not want to rush into anything that might tear it open again. But I kept the letter. I put it in the drawer of my bedside table next to the photo of Linda that I looked at every night before I fell asleep. Sometimes I took it out and read it again, searching for something, though I was not sure what. Time passed. Seasons changed. My new life continued to take shape. I learned some things about myself in that year alone. I learned that I was stronger than I thought, that I could survive loss and betrayal and still find reasons to wake up in the morning. I learned that family is not just about blood, that the connections we choose can be just as meaningful as the ones we are born into. I learned that forgiveness is not a single moment, but a process, something you work toward one day at a time. I never did hate Patricia. I want to make that clear. Even in my darkest moments, even when the pain was freshest, I did not hate her. I hated what she did. I hated the choice she made. But she was still my daughter, still the baby I had held in my arms the day she was born, still the little girl who used to fall asleep on my chest while I watched football on Sunday afternoons. Maybe that makes me foolish. Maybe a wiser man would have cut her off, completely washed his hands of the whole mess. But I have never claimed to be wise. I am just a man who loved his family, who got hurt, who found a way to keep going. About 18 months after I moved, I finally wrote back to Patricia. Just a short note, nothing dramatic. I told her I had read her letter. I told her I was not ready to see her yet, but that I appreciated her honesty. I told her that the door was not closed forever, just closed for now. She wrote back a week later, thanking me, telling me she understood, promising to wait as long as it took. We have exchanged a few letters since then. Nothing deep, just updates on life, small steps towards something that might someday resemble a relationship again. I do not know how the story ends. That is the truth. I do not know if Patricia and I will ever have Sunday dinners together again, if I will ever watch Emma graduate from high school, or walk her down the aisle someday, if I will ever teach Jake to fish the way I taught his mother. What I do know is that I found peace. Not the peace I expected, not the retirement I planned, but peace nonetheless. I have a home by the ocean where I can hear the waves at night. I have friends who check on me and make me laugh. I have my brother and his wife who remind me every day that family can be a blessing when it is not a curse. And I have my dignity. That is what I almost lost, what Patricia almost took from me. My sense of self, my belief that I mattered, that my life was my own. I got that back. I kept it. If you have made it this far in my story, I want to thank you for listening. I know it was long and parts of it were hard to hear, but I think these stories need to be told. Not for revenge, not to shame anyone, but because somewhere out there is someone going through something similar. Someone who needs to know they are not alone. So let me ask you this. Have you ever had to choose between love and your own dignity? Have you ever had to walk away from someone you cared about in order to save yourself? I would love to hear your stories in the comments below. We learn from each other, we support each other. We remind each other that survival is possible. If this story meant something to you, please hit that like button. It helps more people find these videos, more people who might need to hear that they matter, that their lives are their own, that they do not have to accept being treated like they are disposable. And if you want to hear more stories like this, please subscribe and turn on notifications. I plan to keep sharing, keep talking about the things that happen in families, the things we do not always want to admit but need to face. Thank you for spending this time with me. Whatever you are going through right now, I hope you find your own peace. I hope you remember that you are worth protecting. I hope you know that loving yourself is not selfish, it is survival. Take care of yourselves out there. And remember, no matter how old you get, it is never too late to start over.